I know many of you are using your Canon EOS R10 to take photos and you want to get better images, but you're not quite sure where to start. So I put together 5 tips that are really going to get you going on your way to taking better photos. And if you watch to the end of the video, then I'm confident that you're going to be much more pleased with the images coming out of your R10. My first tip is that you make sure you're using the correct autofocusing mode for the specific type of photography that you're going to be doing. The R10 has 8 different autofocusing modes. And to see how each one works, first let's set our camera to manual mode by moving the mode dial to the setting that says M. Next, we need to access our quick menu, which we can do by tapping the little Q icon in the upper right hand corner of the LCD display. Then we need to tap on the icon that says AF. Now we can see our 8 different autofocusing choices at the bottom of the LCD. The first one is our Spot AF, and this is the mode that I use the most often because it allows you to choose the precise spot where you want the camera to focus on. If you touch any area of the LCD, a little box will appear and the camera will reset its focus to that place. And the next 3 choices work exactly the same way. The only difference being that the focusing area represented by that little box gets slightly larger each time you progress to the next mode. And the next 3 choices after that, where you see the numbers 1, 2, and 3, are zone AF modes. The first one is a large square zone. The second one is a vertical rectangle, and the third one is a horizontal rectangle. And the camera is going to choose autofocusing points based on whatever falls within those respective zones. And this can be useful when you don't have a specific point of focus in mind and you want the camera to focus on whatever falls within that area of the frame. You have less control this way, but it's nice for those times when you're in a rush and you just want to snap a quick photo. And with the last mode, you're pretty much allowing the camera to focus on whatever it sees fit within the frame, as you're not choosing any specific point or even any zone. And this mode gives you the least amount of control of all the modes, whereas the first one, which was our Spot AF, gives you the most control. Now, whichever of these modes you prefer, first you have to choose between one-shot operation or servo. With one shot, the camera is going to focus when you half press the shutter. If the subject moves around or you reframe your shot, the camera is not going to refocus until you half press the shutter again. With servo, the camera is going to constantly keep the subject in focus as long as the shutter is halfway pressed. This is extremely useful if the subject is moving around a lot or you want the subject to stay in focus as you reframe your composition. Now, all of the autofocus settings that we've covered so far are extremely important, but what really makes the R10 powerful is its subject tracking features. But before we turn on subject tracking, we first need to make sure that eye detection is enabled. And we can do that by pressing the main menu button of the camera. Then we need to go into our autofocus menu. And if you look down a few lines, you'll see where it says eye detection. We need to go ahead and turn that on. And now let's press that menu button again so we can go back to our main screen. And now we can go to our quick menu. And if you look at the 6th icon on the right-hand side, this is where we choose what we want the camera to track. We can choose between people, animals, and vehicles. So for our purposes, let's go ahead and set it to track people. So now, regardless of which of those 8 autofocusing modes you're in, there's going to be a little box that appears over the eye of the subject. And it's going to appear over the eye that's closest to the camera. But it's not going to focus though, not until you half press the shutter. And when you're ready to snap the photo, just press the shutter all the way down. So now let's move on to tip number 2, which is that you should set your camera up to simultaneously give you both JPEG and RAW file formats. If you've ever heard the term RAW before and you were unsure as to what it was, or you were intimidated by it, then don't worry, because we're about to break it down. RAW is just a file format that captures all the image data that's recorded by the sensor. A JPEG is just a compressed version of that raw data, which results in smaller file sizes that are easier to manage and share. So let's discuss the advantages and disadvantages of both formats. RAW files will give you many more shades of each color, which results in smoother gradients and more vibrant colors. An 8-bit JPEG will give you 16.8 million colors, whereas a 14-bit RAW file, like the ones coming out of the R10, will give you 4.4 trillion colors. Now, when looking at both side by side, you may or may not be able to spot the difference between them right away. But when you open up the RAW file in Lightroom, you're going to see that you're much more capable of bringing back the shadows and the highlights than you are with the JPEG. You can also choose your white balance, contrast, saturation, and sharpness in a non-destructive manner, Whereas with the JPEG, all those things are already baked into the image. You can still make some adjustments with the JPEG, but not nearly as much as you can with the RAW file. And the reason that you should configure your camera to give you both formats is because if you snap a photo and you like the results, then you could just share the JPEG. But let's say you really like the photo, but unfortunately the white balance or the exposure was just a little bit off, then you can open up the RAW file and make the needed adjustments. You can also use presets or color profiles to give you a stylized look. For example, like vintage or film emulation or a teal and orange preset. And I'll leave a link below to my website where you could purchase my LUT pack and Lightroom profiles that are gonna make your photos and footage look amazing. Now, tip number 3 is great for those people who prefer to use the LCD as opposed to the viewfinder. Now, me personally, I almost always use the LCD display because I really don't like having to squint with one eye, and I much prefer framing up my shot with the LCD display instead. And if we go to our quick menu, you're gonna see an icon of a hand touching a screen. And this is a feature called touch shutter. And many people don't know about it unless they accidentally stumble across it. The touch shutter feature is going to allow you to touch the LCD to let the camera know where you want it to focus. But not only is it going to focus, it's also going to snap a photo each time that you touch the LCD. And this can be way faster than choosing a focus point and then having to hit the shutter button to take a photo. That way you're a lot less likely to miss the shot. Oh, and by the way, if you've gained value from this video so far, then do me a favor and smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that little bell icon so you don't miss future videos. I appreciate that. So moving along to tip number 4, which is that you should really start using the full-on manual mode. The R10 is an amazing camera and it can really do so much, but oftentimes people are only using it in the automatic mode, which is fine if you're in a rush and you need to take a quick photo. But I really encourage you to learn how to get proper exposure in manual mode. And that doesn't mean that you always have to use the manual mode, but what it does mean is that when you're using an automatic mode, like shutter priority or aperture priority, and it doesn't give you the results that you were looking for, you'll know exactly what adjustments you'll have to make. And I have a separate video about the different shooting modes of the R10, as well as how to get exposure manually utilizing the exposure triangle. And I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. And that brings us to tip number 5, which is that you should invest in some good lenses. The kit lens that came with your camera is great, but as you grow as a photographer, it's very likely that you're gonna start wanting things like a shallower depth of field, better low light performance. Maybe you want to zoom in on something that's far away or take an up close macro shot. Or maybe you just want overall better image quality. And in all those cases, you'll want to look at some better lens options. My favorite lens is the Sigma 18-35 f1.8 EF lens. And this is the lens that pretty much stays on my camera almost all the time. For long range telephoto situations, I use the Canon EFS 55-250 image stabilized STM lens. And when I need an extremely wide angle, I use the Canon 10-18 image stabilized EFS lens. And these lenses are giving me amazing results, especially considering how affordable they are. And I'll leave links in the description below to all these lenses, as well as the adapter you're gonna need to use them on your R10. And the key to taking better images is no doubt your skills and creativity. But keep in mind, there are certain pieces of gear out there that are really gonna help out. And that's why I highly recommend that you watch this video next, where I share 7 must-have pieces of gear for your Canon R10. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video. It's Fulan Creative, and I'm out. Peace.